We all know high-level D&D is broken, but it's not until you get to those high levels that you realize how much. It's only when you see your wizard casting 300 simulacra in less than 1 hour and then unleashing an array of fireballs on your city to completely level it that you realize that maybe the designers didn't intend for a high-level D&D to be played. But no, fuck that. High-level D&D can be super fun, and me and my friends have been playing it for years, and I'm gonna show you how we do it to make it the best experience possible. There's 3 levels to that thing, so let's jump right in. First, what is high-level D&D? D&D is divided into 4 tiers of play by the DMG and agreed upon by the community. You got level 1 to 4, which is your local heroes. You got level 5 to 10, which is Heroes of the Realm. 11 to 17, which is Masters of the Realm, and 17 to 20, which is Masters of the World. Anything above tier 3 of play is considered high-level play. You'll notice it because most official adventures end right around those levels, and it's also the point where a lot of people agree that balance tends to fall apart. So now that we know this, the question to ask is, why does high-level play suck? The main reason why the game breaks down at those levels is because the GM has an actual mental breakdown. I'm not actually joking. At those levels, the things that players can do are absolutely ridiculous and can be super hard to deal with. One thing is the amount of control your players have over the world increases dramatically. For example, at low level, you can get away with saying things and not having them prepared right away. But at high level, not gonna happen. I'll give you a good example. For one of my low level parties, I mentioned in passing something about a legendary sword. This hooked their interest, and right away they went on a quest trying to get in more information about it, knowing its location, and then finally journeying in the dungeon trying to find it. At high level, what happened is they simply casted legend lore, wind walked, and they literally walked there and they were at the dungeon the next day. Something that took multiple sessions for the other party took literally just 1 hour for the other one. Another big thing is the problem with planning dungeons and fights for high-level parties, because they can do so many things. After all, how do you challenge someone when they have the powers of literal gods? I'll delve more into that in a bit, but the thing is, they're not all broken. At least not the martial classes, for example. If you look at classes like the fighters, the monk, the barbarian, and other martial classes, it's actually fairly okay to prepare for them because their scaling is fairly linear, meaning that you know what to expect damage-wise. If anything, martial characters should be given a bit more love and magic items compared to the ones that actually break high-level D&D, the spellcasters. Because some of the spells in D&D, especially at high level, really break the game. The good thing is we can fix that. It's just gonna require a bit of fine-tuning. The good news I find is that there's not actually that many spells which completely break the game. It's about 5 or 10 of them, but they need to be addressed. Before we address the spell which, as written on paper, obviously break the balance of the game, I want to address the more insidious ones, the ones that you might not realize break the balance of your game when they really do. Or at least in my experience. But before we move on to the next spell, if you can like and subscribe, that would be fantastic. Now, first, the resting spells. Those would be Magnificent Mansion, Demiplane, or even at lower levels, Tiny Hut. These spells are a problem because they allow your players to completely recharge their entire resources at a very minimum cost. As long as they have the spell slot at the end of the day, they can easily rest and wipe all the sweat of the day away. These spells break the game by allowing people to rest. I don't know if you ever had a full night's sleep, but I know I'm much more dangerous after I sleep properly. No, that's a shit joke, Jesus. Let's say you whittle down your party by throwing a ton of encounters at them and now they're about to go face the big boss. Well, you can just plop a Magnificent Mansion, take your beauty sleep, and then come back and completely nuke it. Which completely invalidates the balancing of the game, which is normally supposed to be around 6 to 8 encounters a day. So how do we plan around those spells? One idea is you can change how long rests work, for example doing the gritty realism rules where a long rest is actually 1 week. That changes the entire campaign and your players might not be on board. Another one is just to simply ban them. Most players are okay with bans as long as you tell them in advance, but I know a lot of people are not okay with them. That brings me to solution number 3, which is the one I use most often, which is just to put the players under time pressure. For example, they might not have time to take an 8-hour long rest if the next day the apocalypse is scheduled already. So if we take our dungeon example from earlier, sure, let's say they plot the Magnificent Mansion and go take their rest, and now they're completely fine when they come back out. Now all of a sudden the configuration of the dungeon has changed and they're no longer in front of the boss door. That could be one thing. Another thing is all the monsters have reappeared in the dungeon and now they need to fight again and exhaust their resources regardless. Or a third option, the boss that they were trying to stop has already moved on and raised an entire town. And that's on their hand. Now for your second type of insidious spells which can break the balance of D&D. D&D is built around 3 pillars: exploration, social, and combat. These spells completely neutralize the exploration part of things, and those would be your teleportation spells, such as teleportation circle or teleport or plane plane shift, or spells of that nature. Here, there's a couple of things I want to mention. The thing is, your players are usually going to follow hints that you give them. So it just means that now if you drop a hint about something, you better have at least a couple of notes scribbled about that particular location. The second thing is, they will also tend to go back to location that they've been to before. So make sure to save your notes and have the things prepared so that you're not caught by surprise when they go back to a previous city that they've been to before. You can encourage your players to actually go and explore locations because many of the spells don't work across planes, for example. So if you want to take them somewhere and make them trudge through a plane that they have no knowledge of, they'll have to walk there. And there you can throw the encounters and all of the things that you want to do with your exploration. Now, as I mentioned earlier, let's talk about the spells which actually break the game. First mention, Simulacrum. Honestly, that spell, even at 9th level, would be incredibly good. At 7th, it's completely busted. This spell allows you to break the entire action economy, spell economy, the economy itself, just by how it is worded. You can cast Simulacrum on yourself, and if it has a 9th level spell slot using Wish, it can also cast Simulacrum on you, creating a new Simulacrum, which also has access to Wish, and so on and so forth, and next thing you know, you have thousands of duplicates, which, as you can imagine, the game was not balanced around that. You can create an infinite army with basically infinite spell slots. So then how do we balance the spell? Honestly, the solution is pretty simple. Just allow one copy to exist at a time. That's it. And if you want to nerf it a bit further, you can also say that the Simulacrum cannot cast spells of a level which are higher than the spell slot you've used to create the Simulacrum. So for example, if you use a 7th level, it can cast up to 7th level max. By the way, this still makes it an incredibly strong spell because you can still roll up to a boss fight and have an extra spellcaster on your team, which is really strong. Then we have Etherealness, a spell which on the face of it doesn't look all that broken until it's used in your game and then you realize how insane it is. All it does is bring you on the ethereal plane and allows you to see on the material plane while you're there. Doesn't sound that crazy. The thing is, you then realize the ethereal plane is empty and they can go through walls because the walls don't extend into the ethereal plane. Meaning that if you have a dungeon, the player can cast Etherealness, Vanish, scout the entirety of the dungeon from complete safety, return, tell everything to their party member, and they can just go ahead and explore and never fall into any trap. I'm not a big fan of the design of this spell in general, because the only way you can affect a player is to actually send enemies on the ethereal plane. But the thing is, if you do that repeatedly, the player will feel targeted, because, well, of course. But that's also the only counter you have, because there's only two ways to access the ethereal plane. Etherealness or Blink, and Blink puts you there at the end of your turn, so it basically does nothing. For example, Fireball, great spell, but if I put you in a small room, you might think about it twice before casting it. I know you'll cast it anyway because you're crazy, but you know what I mean. You can also put enemies which are resistant or even immune to fire. There's many plays around that spell. Etherealness, there's basically none. It's either you go with the lore of your setting says that the ethereal plane is dangerous and has hurricanes and various enemies, in which case the spell kind of becomes useless because you just go alone into enemy territory, which is very dangerous for you, or you say that it doesn't, in which case the spell is just the best scouting tool in the game. So as with all the spells on this list, you can either ban it, but once again some players might not like that, or a nerf I like to implement is just the longer you stay on the plane, the more concentration checks you have to make to be able to remain on that plane, and eventually the checks get so high that you just automatically fail. You can choose to make those every 10 minutes, every hour, depending on how hard you want to nerf the spell, or if you're fine with the spell, you just don't nerf it at all and accept that traps are just not going to be a thing in your games.
Honorable mention.
I'll give an honorable mention to Animal Shapes, because it's a spell which on the face of it is not actually broken in the language that they intended for it to work, but can be made very broken indeed. The spell allows you to turn any creatures of your choice into CR4 beasts, which doesn't sound that broken, but the thing is it says any creatures of your choice within a 30 feet radius, and you can pack a lot of creatures in there. For example, you're a druid, go to a forest, befriend all the squirrels there, put them in a circle around you, and all of a sudden you have 100 squirrels, turn them into wasps, put them in a bag, unleash them in a city, and then use your action to turn them all into elephants. And now you're marching on the city with your elephants. But as a DM, it's very easy to counter, you can just tell your player no. At number 3, we have Wall of Force, which is a crazy spell. Sorry, you can't dodge out of the way in time, there's no saving throw for you.
Dispel magic!
Sorry, you can't actually dispel the magic, it's special magic. Sorry, you can't actually break the wall, it's a special wall, it's unbreakable. Sorry, you can't go in the ethereal plane to go through it, it's a special wall. Seriously, like, it just like flies in the face of all the game design of D&D thus far. That single spell and its older brother forcecage, which I'll talk about later, just completely neutralize so many types of play. For example, you want to put a big fighter enemy in front of them. If they can't teleport, they're just screwed. Same for a barbarian or for a monk. Just to show you how ridiculous Wall of Force is, it's a 5th level spell. Wall of Stone is also a 5th level spell, except that you can make a dex save to try to get out of the way. You can actually break the wall. You can actually dispel the magic.
Dispel magic.
At the end of the day, we need to consider that the DM is a player too, and if they're getting a headache trying to plan for encounters and it's not fun for them, well, it's not great. Everybody should be having fun at the table. So how about we make our lives as DM a bit easier? A simple nerf that you can give to those spells if you want to keep them as is just to restore to the balance they had in previous editions of D&D, where it was a heavy material component cost to be able to cast the spell once. For example, you won't be spamming forcecage if you have to pay 5,000 golds each time you need to cast the spell. Now the players will have to make a strategic decision. Do I burn the components on the spell or do I save it for later? And when the spell does come out, it still feels incredibly impactful, as it should be. Alternatively, you can go the Pathfinder route and give it an AC and some hit points so the enemies can actually break the wall. That's also very viable. Wall of Force, as I mentioned, forces the GM into a certain type of monsters and encounters. Forcecage is that, but even worse, because now, if the enemy doesn't have high charisma and teleportation, they're just trapped in there forever. And you don't even need to concentrate. Like, what the hell? I genuinely don't understand how these two spells made it through playtesting. They're so obviously broken. By the way, if you're a GM and this spell happens in your game and you find it perfectly fine, by all means, keep running it as it's written. Me, I just find it a bit too strong. Another spell which online seems to get a lot of complaint is Glibness. This spell on Warlocks or Bards is just incredible, allowing all your charisma checks to be 15 or higher and anything that you say to be regarded as the truth. While Counterspell and Dispel Magic require checks using your spellcasting modifier, which would be charisma for you. So you cannot fail a counterspell or dispel magic, which is just incredible. I personally find that this spell doesn't require a nerf at all, in the sense that persuasion is not mind control. So you won't be able to persuade the king to give you his kingdom, for example. That's just not something that's going to happen. And in regards to counterspell and dispel magic, well, if you're casting counterspell or dispel magic in the first place, it means you're fighting spellcasters, which also have access to counterspell or dispel magic. So they can dispel magic guildness, or they can counterspell you when you try to counterspell them. In my mind, it works just fine. And then finally, we have the motherlode of all spells, Wish.
I wish.
I wish.
And it's honestly fine. If you put players under time pressure and they have to go get to places, they don't have that much time to rest, they'll just get one use of it. And it's also a spell with a heavy cost baked into it, because if you don't use it to replicate the effect of a spell, you might just lose Wish forever, and players think about it twice before casting it. I don't find particular issue with it. Now, the second breakdown is on the player's end, because you realize when you get to high level that the XP requirements to level up get insane, in the realm of you have to kill multiple demigods just to be able to gain one level. So just switch it up to milestone leveling. That's an easy fix. Another common complaint that I see was pretty well summarized in this post, saying, aside from the sheer amount of XP needed to level up, most high level characters are already powerful and have completed their character arc. At that point, the game starts to feel like you're just fighting big things for no reason, which gets boring after a couple of sessions. There's two things I want to say to that. First, it is true. Now your players are incredibly strong for the world. They can influence politics. They can be threats to opposing nations. As such, the enemies they face need to be up to size. They need to be continental threats, if not worldwide threats. Otherwise, they just won't catch the interests of your players. That's just a fact. The second fact regarding character growth, as the GM, there's this great thing which you can do, which is called creating new trauma. I'll give you an example from a current campaign I'm playing in, where I'm a level 19 warlock and my DM did an amazing job setting up the final villain. It is an evil god, the former patron of my warlock, and somebody that I despise profoundly. His whole gimmick revolves around that nobody knows his name. But we did learn it, and the problem is when you say that name out loud, he knows who said it and who you said it to. And he doesn't like that at all. So in character, I had a fiance whom I pronounced the name to, and that god found her and slaughtered her right in front of my eyes. You know, fairly traumatizing experience, especially because there was nothing I could do at the time, seeing as my character was fairly low level. A few levels later, I pronounce his name again by accident, and as revenge, he brings her back from the dead, make me believe that she was never dead in the first place,
Gaslight, Gatekeep, Girl Boss.
Only to have her try to kill me and force me to kill her instead. So it doesn't matter that we're level 19, I'm still super heavily invested in the story because I've lost so much to it and I have so many stakes riding on it. And finally, the last thing that breaks at high level, which is the combat balance. You'll soon realize that the steer system doesn't really work at high level because it doesn't include magic items, it doesn't include the effects of crazy spells, which means that your fight, which you thought was deadly encounter for your party, turns out to be easy as they just wipe the floor with them. That's a problem. And the thing is, it's a bit harder to balance because each party's power level is different. The best way I personally found to do this is the kitchen sink approach, where you just throw everything at your party and you see at what point they start to break. This will require a bit of practice as the first few waves you'll send to your players they'll probably wipe the floor with, you crank up the difficulty and you see, do they feel threatened? Do they not? If they still are not threatened, you crank up the difficulty once again up until you get to a point where you're satisfied. From there, you'll be able to determine the amount of hit points the enemy needs to have to be able to be threatening to your party, and you can adjust. While I'm trying to figure out the balancing needed for my party, I will definitely have some adds at the ready. In case they completely destroy the boss, I'll just send those in, but they won't be necessary to the fight in case they get stomped.